This podcast is brought to you by Bach Audio, makers of vintage-inspired microphones optimized for the demands of today's music. Backed by 30 years of experience, Bach Audio mics are custom-made in the USA by David Bach. Bach Audio, vintage made modern. Learn more at bachaudio.com.
Hey, it's Larry Crane. Welcome to the Tape Op Podcast. Too often, people assume that those of us in the field of music recording had a distinct idea of what we wanted to do when we started. The truth is almost always that it's a wild and unpredictable path we end up on. Vance Powell is a perfect example of this. Starting off in live sound, he also had a parallel path in small recording studios along the way. When an opportunity came up to help build what would become one of the largest studio complexes in the world, he was there, becoming chief engineer for Nashville's Blackbird studios. Projects outside of Blackbird soon beckoned, and Vance started working extensively with Jack White with his groups the Raconteurs, the White Stripes, the Dead Weather, as well as many of Jack's other production jobs, including Wanda Jackson's The Party Ain't Over and a slew of 7-inch singles for Jack's Third Man Records. His work has earned him 3 Grammy Awards for Jars of Clay, Buddy Guy, and the Raconteurs. Along the way, he's recorded with a wide variety of artists, including Keb Mo, Martina McBride, The Secret Machines, and Karen Elson. I ran around Nashville on a crazy tour with Vance for 11 hours one day, and near the end we sat down to chat at Sputnik Sound, a fun studio space he shares with producer Mitch Dane.
This audio recording was not originally tracked with the intent of using for a podcast. It was recorded solely for transcription for our print interview. Please forgive any balance issues, background sounds, or lack of clarity. Enjoy.
So let's start this out. Let's get a little bit of history. You mentioned Missouri and stuff too, and the live stuff. Where the hell did you start? When did you first start doing audio?
I graduated. I was one of those kids that kind of went to a college sort of thing in high school that, like, really nerdy deal. It was a tech school.
Yeah.
So I did go to school with like all the kids who were taking welding, so it was sort of a nerdy redneck thing, which was pretty okay. But I took electronics.
Yeah.
And so 3 hours a day, every day, I took electronics for, 2 years. Yeah. And that's probably good. My grandfather, my 2 grandfathers, one was a engineer in the truest sense, engineer, and the other one was a brick mason who spent his whole life inventing things.
Really?
He invented all kinds of weird stuff. He invented this thing that detected tornadoes. Now, really, all it did was it detected the RF field created by tornado, but he figured out because we lived in Missouri where there were tornadoes, by actually tuning it during a tornado, he could figure out how far away it was or how close it was.
Wow.
He built all kinds of really crazy stuff. So I sort of had that in me to begin with.
You grew up in Missouri? I
grew up in Missouri, Joplin, Missouri, a little tiny town, 40,000 people in the corner of Kansas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas, the 4-state area.
Yeah.
And, it was cool. It was a good time. It was, I graduated in 1982. And right when I came out of high school, I decided I didn't want to go into electrical engineering. At that point, I wanted to be a computer programmer. I decided, I want to be a computer programmer.
Yeah.
But in all this time, I was also the kid who had a cool stereo. So, I had this cool stereo and a cool turntable, and I had a shitty car and cool speakers. I think when I graduated high school, I had a Fiat with an Alpine cassette deck in it, and somehow I shoehorned some Jensen 6x9s into the back, and it sounded really great.
Yeah.
So I had a great stereo at home, I had a good stereo in my car, even though my car was a piece of shit. Fiat. Green Fiat that I drove for 7 months without a starter. I would just push it. It would jump start at 1 mile an hour.
park on a hill?
Sometimes, yeah. So I actually changed the rear tire on it once just by lifting the back of the car up. It was so little piece of shit, $10.
So it sounds like you were a music fan then.
I was a music fan. I was a huge music fan.
Yeah.
I was hugely influenced by all the same things that every kid in 1982 was influenced by. Pink Floyd, the Beatles, the Stones, all those things. But my first concert I ever saw, which was in '78, was the Talking Heads.
Nice.
And that sort of propelled me into that sort of like looking like kind of skinny tie, turning Japanese and all that shit. Yeah. The thing was, I wasn't living new wave. I wasn't living in a town that was cool enough to actually really have a pulse on that. Yeah. All I had was what was on, not on the radio, but what was just sort of popular of that type stuff.
You'd hear about Blondie.
I hear about Blondie. Oh yeah, I was a huge Blondie. The Cars, love the Cars. Yeah. Police. Yeah. All that. I mean, there were so many things. Yeah, exactly. There were so many things I didn't know anything about because we lived in a town of 40,000 people. But when I got to college, a friend of mine who worked at an auto upholstery shop, a couple of the guys in the auto upholstery shop had a little band. So he played guitar. So he had been my brother's best friend, but then my brother had gotten married because his girlfriend got pregnant, and they're still married to this day, which is funny. But he didn't have any friends anymore, so I was the next best thing. So I started hanging out. We started hanging out. He was cool. Yeah. And he was old enough to buy beer, which made things really cool. Yeah. And we would go and, drink and go to this little jam session. Yeah. And the guys who were in the jam session, actually, their son knew some guys who were quite a bit younger, not quite a bit, but, we were 20 and they were 17. Yeah. And they were pretty good. We were like trying to play. They were trying to do all that new wave stuff. Right. And somehow these kids were from a small town. They were kind of clued in. And so we started playing. I started mixing their band live. Yeah. And I remember playing a gig, and after the gig, they're literally being girls hanging out. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm in college, and I'm sitting around a cold-ass terminal waiting for my stupid bullshit, assembly language programming to come out. And I could be out here where there's like actual girls that want to talk to me. Yeah. Because I'm actually sort of with the band. Yeah. Absolutely. So about that same time that I kind of quit college, there was a really cool kind of rock scene happening coming out of Lawrence and Kansas City. Yeah. There's a bunch of really cool bands, the Clocks, Fool's Face, this band called the Dogs, and all these bands would come down to our little neck of the woods, a little tiny town in Kansas called Galena, Kansas. And there was a bar there called Sgt. Pepper's. It was a big venue, and they had live bands. Yeah. And I just went and I just fell in love with the whole thing of making music, and because I loved when I went and saw these bands, I loved the way it felt. Mm-hmm. I loved watching the band and feeling the kick drum in my gut and watching the way the audience reacted and hearing it and just everything about it. Yeah. So I quit school and started working with this band, and I was still living at home. I had a scholarship to school, which was one of those things. And I decided I wanted to take a little time off. And I kind of remember my mom said the greatest thing. She goes, well, I think that's great. You've got to follow your own path. Where are you going to be living? Yeah. And I said, well, actually what she said was, when did you make up this decision? And I go, well, it was about a week ago. She goes, well, where are you going to be living? And I go, well, I was thinking at the house. She goes, oh no, you've got about a week. And then that was my thrust into life.
I got a month.
Yeah, you got a month? Well,
yeah.
the funny thing was I later, I went on the road and traveled, and I didn't really have a home.
Yeah.
And she let me kind of come back and, live there on and off. But so the long and short of it is I kind of quit school, quit computer nerdery to become an audio nerder.
Yeah.
And started mixing bands and just doing live sound. And right about that same time, I took a gig. Well, not around that time, but maybe about a year later.
Yeah.
Because I worked at Radio Shack.
Yeah.
By the way, I worked at Radio Shack. And one of the guys who worked at Radio Shack had a little studio where he had an 80-8 and a Tascam 3, which we actually, I think, have around here somewhere. And he had that, and we would go out and we would do some recordings at his place. And about that same, around somewhere in there, I actually took a gig at a music store in Oklahoma. It was actually a pretty hip little music store. Yeah. In a little tiny lake town. Yeah. And this guy had made a little business of selling guitars kind of cheap and bringing people in from out of town. Like people would come from Tulsa and Oklahoma City up to his store, and then they'd end up buying something else. They'd buy a Strat for a few dollars over cost. Yeah. Then they'd buy an amp, So, right. And it was kind of a cool store. And while I was working there, I got offered my first road gig, which is kind of funny because the drummer in that band is the drummer for Tool, Danny Carey. Right. He was the drummer in this cover band.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and so I always wanted to kind of say, "Hey, Danny, I remember when you were doing Oh Sheila, and Everybody Wants to Rule the World, and and 1999, and all these cover songs." But I haven't seen him. But
it's good practice.
Yeah, I thought that was funny. But I went out with this band, and then that turned into a band. That band broke up, and right about that time, there was a little local band from a little town called Pittsburgh, Kansas, because all these towns are pretty close to each other.
Yeah.
Pittsburgh's a college town, and there was this band that had played a gig that had actually gotten like newspaper worthy response.
Yeah.
They never played a gig anywhere, and they played this gig, and sort of a bunch of people kind of freaked out on them, and they wrote this article, and IRS Records was actually, they'd sent a demo to IRS, and IRS was interested in them, and so I went up and met them and talked to them, and they were really, really, really talented. They're really good, and but the drummer was very nice. He just wasn't very good.
Yeah.
It was very nice. I had a friend who was an amazing drummer. I hooked the two of them up, and we ended up playing a lot. And the name of the band was, and this is kind of a weird, it's a Southern thing, it's called A Picture Made. And no one could ever get the name right. But we started doing a lot of shows. We started opening. I'm mixing the band and kind of being the adult in charge of the band. Yeah. And we did shows, Sonic Youth, Soul Asylum, Camper Van Beethoven, Cracker, Guadalcanal Diary. We did the show with the Replacements. Yeah. Well, actually, two things happened. We did a show in New York. We played a CBGB show with, we were on tour with this band, the Connells. And we played a show at CBGB's, and we went on after this band called Scruffy the Cat.
Remember them, yeah.
And we went on basically as everybody was leaving. Yeah. And everyone left, but I think his name is, and this is wouldn't put this in, but I think his name is Frank Wells. Yeah. And now he's a big time agent now. But he had this little agency that had Camper Van Beethoven and Sonic Asylum and Husker Du, the Replacement. He's a booking agent. 10,000 Maniacs. He had all these cool acts at the time. And he stood up front with about 10 or 15 other people and watched the band. And afterwards said, "I don't know who the fuck you guys are. I don't know what you're doing, but you're signed." And the first thing he did was put us out on the road with the Replacements. Right. Which lasted one gig. It actually lasted two, but it only really lasted one real gig. Yeah. We played a gig in in Raleigh, and we had just recorded our first EP with Mitch Easter, and then we played a show at Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and in the show, the singer for the band basically incited a riot, and people climbed up on the stage and was diving off, and craziness ensued. And the Replacements loved it, but immediately said, "There's no fucking way we're going on after you guys ever." So they paid us for the rest of the tour to not do it. Because Westerberg or one of those guys basically said, "Look, we're good, but we're not always good.
Yeah.
So we don't want that pressure."
And my band opened up for them back then, '85
Were they
or
great?
something. They were all kind of, they were sick. It wasn't one of their better shows.
I saw those. I saw one where it was just like
colds.
Like, you know, and then I saw one that was just, they were all fucking on.
Yeah.
On.
Yeah.
And that was on that tour. That was on Pleased to Meet Me. So that was on the Jim Dickinson record.
Yep.
But, yeah, Bob was already gone.
Yeah.
He was gone.
I remember talking to Bob back then.
Yeah.
He was a wreck.
He playing a diaper?
Not that night, yeah.
But,
yeah.
So while that was all going on, obviously we recorded with Mitch. Yeah. I was out with that band, and I had been doing, recording in Lith's little studio in Joplin, and there was another studio in Joplin that was bigger, and it was owned by the guy who owned the music store in town, and it was actually it had two MX-70 16 tracks, and Syncon B 40 channel Alan Heath desk, had an MTR 12, quarter-inch machine. And it was actually sort of a real, kind of a real studio in its time. A lot of carpet. Yeah. And had a carpeted drum booth. And when I went in there, the owner, Rick, who I love him now. I love him then, but I love him now. But he had taped maxi pads to all the toms. Yeah. To get that nice, gated drum thing.
Oh man.
Which I immediately took off.
Yeah.
But I went in there to do this friend of mine. They had a band and they wanted me to record it because the guy who normally did it was sick.
No, that's how you get your
So I went in. That's exactly right. I went in there and Rick kind of showed me around the console. It was in line, but I kind of got it. It was cool. And I had to get his help a couple times, but basically got through the day. And he came in about 6:00 and we played in the song we did. And he goes, "Well, you guys are still working. Here's the keys. Come by tomorrow.
Drop them off.
Come by tomorrow, and we need to talk." I said, "Okay, cool." I go, "Yeah, I'll bring your keys by, drop them off for you." He goes, "Oh, no. Those are yours. You're the new engineer here. You know more than any of us." And I was like, "I don't know anything." And he said, "No, you do." He goes, "You may not technically know anything, but I'll teach you all that." So that was sort of my first...
That's awesome.
And so I went in the next day. He offered me $5 an hour for engineering, and I could do whatever I wanted whenever I wanted. So if I had a band that I wanted to do, he would let me do it. The funny thing is that was probably on a Saturday or Friday, and he told me, he said, "So there's a session on Saturday I'll need you for." I'm like, "Okay, what is it?" He goes, "Oh, well, I'll tell you more about it." Come to find out, it was this Southern gospel thing. Little did I realize how much I was going to learn about people singing together. Yeah. Because I did about 10 Southern gospel records in a row. Guy playing piano and four men, usually guys, singing harmony, like tight harmony together, as white as it could ever possibly be. Boom, bum, 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 and singing about gold streets and I think the first record, like the first actual entire record I ever did, was the Crusaders for Christ, and I think the record was called "Kicking Up Gold Dust." And I am sure that in the attic of my house in a box, I actually have that cassette tape.
Oh my God, you're right.
But the funny thing was we recorded all this, and it wasn't cool, but we recorded it all, and then when we mixed it, I recorded it one day and then mixed it that night, and they were all going to dinner while I was mixing, and while we finished mixing, and then they were like, "Well, we were going to run out to dinner, do you want us to bring you something?" I was like, "Yeah, let me get this or this." It was a Chinese restaurant across the street, and they said, "Great, well, here's the order we wanted in." And I remember looking at that sheet of paper and thinking, "Well, you don't want it in this order that's on the tape the way it is now?" And we're sitting there.
That's funny.
This is probably 1986.
Yeah.
I remember just sitting and looking at it going, "Okay, well, let's learn how to edit tape."
I guess so.
And sure enough, by the time they came back, an hour or so
God.
later, I had cut all those apart and taped it and figured it out, you know?
Yeah.
And then I decided that it would be a good idea to go ahead and cut the masters apart and leader them.
Right.
And then the next day when I came in, my boss said, yeah, we really don't do that because this is a rental tape.
Oh.
I was like, oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, I thought I was doing a good job here.
Right.
I was like, oh, don't worry about it. Tape's cheap.
Right. It was then.
It wasn't then, yeah. But so that was sort of my start. But right about that same time, in '90, I got laid off.
At the studio?
Well, the studio, I was working for the studio, but then when A Picture Made broke up in '88, I went to work for the owner of the studio repairing guitar amps because I went to electronic school. So I repaired guitar amps, and we installed like PA systems in churches and schools and phone systems, and that was sort of my daytime gig.
Yeah.
And then I worked at the studio at night or on the weekends. And my daytime gig, which I think I made minimum wage at the time, in the winter of '90, I got laid off.
Yeah.
And I went and did a show up in Springfield with a band. I mixed a show in Springfield. And the owner of this club, which will remain nameless, he offered me a gig running the club, which was a very cool place to see bands in Springfield. And I jumped on it because I just wanted to move. I wanted to get out of Joplin and get out of, and try to get a gig in Springfield with Lou Whitney.
Right.
And I had never at this point ever met him. I had just happened to have seen a Morel show like years and years and years and years and years before on accident.
Yeah.
We happened to be, I went up with a band up to Lawrence and they played the Coyote or something. And we went over and I saw the last 20 minutes of the Morel show and I was just like so blown away. So I kind of knew who he was, and but I really wanted to meet him and I wanted to get a gig at his studio, which was called Column 1 in those days. And so I went to Springfield. I worked for this club owner guy whose main gig in life really was selling cocaine. That was his gig.
There were a lot of clubs like that.
A lot of clubs like that. Not big clubs, stay up in a lot, have a lot of nights when no one would come in and money was everywhere.
Yeah.
People would come in, but they wouldn't go to the bar. They would all go upstairs and come back downstairs. So
I remember places like that.
And then, so I worked for him for about 11 months and I finally got tired of it. And I was blowing my head off. And in that time I had met Lou. And I went to work for Lou at his place. Started doing some work at Column 1, which was really cool, little studio. And very 70s.
What kind of jobs was he doing around then?
Well, he'd just done the Roscoe's Gang record. And he was doing, he did Roscoe's Gang. We did a record with Scott Kempner from the Del Lords, also from the Del Lords.
Yeah.
I worked on that with him. And then he had a band called the Skeletons, and we were doing a lot of shows with the Skeletons.
Yeah.
And then we went out and we did a tour with Dave Alvin and the Skeletons.
Oh, nice.
But I was sort of doing all the local bands. And there was a bunch of local bands. And every now and then, it's funny, man, I get every now and then someone will email me, so I'll see my name on some record. There was a band from Columbia called Spankin' Rufus. And I don't know if you ever out in the West Coast had it, but in the Midwest, we had a little ska scare.
Oh, yeah.
There was a band in St. Louis called The Urge. They were huge.
Yeah.
And they played a lot. They were, horn band, sort of a horn ska band.
Yeah.
And they played a lot in Columbia, and so there was all these like bands with horns.
There was an earlier scare which was kind of like 80s, like post Twin Tone UK thing that would hit the Bay Area and stuff, especially. And then I remember,
well, by '91 it had made its way to Springfield and St. Louis.
Because then there's the punk ska sort of thing that happens like '96.
Yeah, well, it's funny because the Urge, they were basically doing what No Doubt made famous.
Right, exactly.
I mean, they were basically doing that back in the day. They just fell into the whole of Middle America.
That's funny.
But this band, Spanking Rufus, I actually got an email the other day from a guy who was like, I saw your name on this. I love that Spanking Rufus record. Like, do you have any copies of it? I was like,
Dude.
Like the last thing in the world. Although the record was very funny. There was a guy there in Springfield who worked for Chris Christopherson, of all people. And he was on the road with Christopherson, and he had a monitor rig, and they called me. He called me, and he's like, "Hey, Tammy Wynette wants to rent my monitors for Monday or whatever in Branson.
Yeah.
Can you take them down there?" Yeah. Okay, so I go get his keys, I load it all up, I drive it down there, set it all up. Well, they turn up late. They had some long overnight drive. So I'd kind of turned it all up, got it all working, rang out all the wedges. They came in, man, just threw everything up and did this show. And the monitor guy said, "Look, hey, man, why don't you stay, because I want to get you paid for these, and maybe we'll go have some lunch. Do you mind just hanging out?" I said, "Okay." So I hung out, I watched this show. Little did I realize I'd be watching it again about 3,000 more times. But I watched it, and, you know, it was cool in a classic country way, you know, and Tammy sang her ass off.
Some great songs, huh?
Yep, and she sang her ass off.
Yeah.
And afterwards, we talked, and it was cool. And I had a Clark Technic EQ I was wanting to sell. He was like, he had a little sound company. He's like, "Yeah, I'd like to buy it. Let me get your number." I gave him his number. I said, "Yeah, just call me if you want it." So that was that. So a couple more of those Tammy gigs came up, but nothing really big.
Yeah.
And I continued working for Lou, again, just making records that no one's ever heard of.
It was like a good learning curve.
It was great. It was great.
You're working on stuff, you know, where the bands aren't paying like a ridiculous amount of money to be there either. So it
was the best schooling ever.
Yeah.
Because when I worked with Lou, I got to watch the way Lou dealt with the band. I mean, that was the biggest lesson.
Yeah.
And Lou made me do all the studio maintenance. He didn't make me do it, but he was just like, "Oh, well, you know how to do this." So I mean, you know, so I aligned the tape machines, and you know, and he taught me some tricks. But really, what he did, and I think this is like what is missing sort of today with these schools, is that he allowed me to make mistakes. Yeah. He allowed me to, you know, fuck up punches, and he allowed me to do all that shit. Yeah. And then when I did something really cool, he'd sit in the studio and hang out and listen. Yeah. And not just, you know, not listen the way I play things for people. Like, he would sit and listen. And then afterwards, he'd say, "Man, that sounds really good," or, "Man, I think that's great. I think the bass is too loud in this song," or whatever. He was very creative, very nice, you know, even-tempered criticism, which was great because it didn't make me, you know, it made me feel like, great, I want to fix that now. You know what I mean? Instead of, "Fuck you, I know better." You know? But I was there till 90. Like I said, about 91, I got this phone call from this guy who worked for Tammy, and he wanted to know if I wanted to move to Nashville and take a gig with Tammy Wynette. It was funny because I remember being like, "Well, no." And then I just thought, hold it. You're talking about Nashville. This is the recording capital, you know, kind of one of the recording capital of the world now, but it's sort of the recording capital of the United States. And even though it's country and all that, you know, Jason Scorchers came from there. You know, I was just thinking, like, you know, there is hope here, you know, and so I remember asking, "Well, what does it pay?" It's like $200 a day. I was like, $200 a day? Fuck, I'm on my way now. So I came over here and I went out and I tried out with her, and it was hard, man. It was a tough gig, but I liked her and I liked him, and I started commuting 440 miles to work. Right. I would drive over. We'd go out for 3 or 4 days and stay at a motel. Oh, man. And then, you know, if we were staying for a couple of days, I'd just stay in this motel that one side of the motel was for people from the interstate, and the back side was like the Nashville version of Amsterdam. It was like hookers and drug dealers, and literally like girls. They would just hang out. I got to kind of not know them, but I mean, kind of like, hey. You know, but Nashville was a lot seedier in those days. Downtown was pretty. It's not like it is now. I started doing the Tammy thing. And that was cool. And about 7 months into it, and I was doing monitors, which I'm not very good at. But about 7 months in, the front of house guy quit, and they hired me to do production manager front of house. Because I was always a mixer guy, always. And I did that for about 4 more years. And the big thing, like, working for Tammy was great when it started because she worked a fair number of dates a year. But as her health got worse, she worked less, and we had a lot of dates that would get canceled, and you know, you wouldn't get paid to do them. And what this is all leading up to is, while that's going on, my roommate took a job with Martina McBride. And this would have been 97.
Yeah.
And by 97, Tammy was... I really hadn't done any studio thing. I've done anything in the studio since 96. It'd been about a year.
Yeah.
And everywhere I tried to get a gig here, they wanted to hire me as an intern. And, I was 29 years old and had basically ran a studio for 4 years.
Yeah.
And had been the other engineer in a studio for, 3 years.
Yeah.
2 or 3 years, on and off.
Yeah.
And I was just like,
yeah.
not really going to be an intern. And I'm 29 years old, and I just, the reality was that I probably should have done it.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of things to learn here. But
it's a different world.
It's a different world.
Yeah.
I should have done it, but I didn't. So my roommate sent McBride to me. McBride called me. We talked.
Yeah.
And he said, look, this is not a front of house gig. He goes, but I need someone to do front of house because I'm going to South America with Garth Brooks. He was Garth Brooks' production manager.
Yeah.
I'm going with Garth for a month, so I need somebody who can mix. But for the first half of the month, I need you to do, I need you to be a set carpenter, stage manager. And then for the back half of this tour, I need you to do both.
Oh, man.
And I was like, okay, well, what's it pay? Told me it was less than what I was making, but it was a lot more work. I said, okay, I'll do it. So I went out and did it. Him and I hit it off. And that sort of started the whole thing.
Yeah. By
the end of that tour, Martina had actually gotten pregnant, was taking a maternity leave. I went out and I did a tour with Nancy Griffith, which was really cool.
Yeah.
While I was touring with her, we did a show here in Nashville with the Nashville Symphony and the Nashville Ballet. Yeah. So it was like Nancy played on stage, the symphony was in the pit, and the ballet was happening on the stage.
That's insane.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And I recorded that for her. I totally snuck it in on my Pro Tools 3 system on my MacBook.
Yeah.
My MacBook, or not MacBook, on my PowerBook, whatever it was called at the time.
Yeah.
3600 or something. And I gave her a disc of it.
Yeah.
And she gave that disc to Peter Asher, which is kind of funny because she told him, this is what I really want my record to sound. And I told him that on the phone.
Good thing to tell your
A&R
person.
Great, thanks. But while I was doing that, I did a show. I ran into these guys, the band Jars of Clay. Right. I just ran into them at a rehearsal hall. Yeah. We ended up liking a lot of the same music, and they were doing a show the same night I was doing a show. So I went and saw their sound check and rehearsal, and it was really cool. Yeah. And so I found out, because at that time I was working for Clare Brothers Audio. I went and talked to them about doing monitors for them. And they're like, well, we already got somebody to do monitors, but we need a front of house guy. I was like, okay, this is great. Yeah. I went out and did that tour, and we hit it off. Martina wanted me to go out and do monitors for her. I had a hard time turning her down. I didn't. I went in and did it. But about 3 months into it, I was like, this isn't working for me. Yeah. So I got my gig with Jars back. Yeah. Worked for them for about 4 years. And while in that 4 years, we started doing a lot of recording out on the road. Sometimes it'd just be through the desk. Yeah. Right. And they started using board mixes for fan club records. Yeah. Just right out of the desk, for fan club records.
That's great.
And so in late 2000, they asked me to do a record with them, a Christmas record. It's pretty hilarious.
Awesome.
And we started that record on New Year's, which didn't make any sense. Why would we do a Christmas record on New Year's? But they had a schedule to do their new record starting in March. Right. And so they had this little window between January and March. They wanted to just do this Christmas record and then put it out like Christmas time.
Yeah.
So we started doing some demos, and after about the first week, it was obvious that nobody had Christmas on their mind. And after about the second or third week,
kind of hard to be thinking about it.
After about the second or third week, it was like, you know what? We need to let's just record demos for our record. So we started doing demos for the record, and then the producer who was supposed to do the record bowed out. So they were sort of like, maybe this is a time maybe we should do a record ourselves. So we started working and finished on September 9th, 2001, or September 10th, 2001.
Yeah.
So 10 months later.
Yeah.
And day before September 11th, all that.
That's weird.
And we finished this little studio where I showed you earlier, playground.
Yeah.
We went home, and then the next morning we were getting up to go get all the studio stuff out, and everything happened. And when all that happened, all that was going on. I was making this record. I was having conversations with John because John was wanting to build a studio at his house. Right. And while all that's going on, I'm going over, I'm playing rough mixes at John's house, and we're, all this stuff's going on. After September 11th, there was all this work fell out everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And especially the touring, as people were scared to go to shows. Mm-hmm. And so right about that time is when John was starting to buy gear and look at building a studio, and come there in 2000, or in 2002, January 2002, he bought what became Blackbird.
Right.
And about 3 months later, about the 30th of March, called me up. I just gotten off tour. So he called me and basically was saying, hey, look, it's not going as fast as I want.
Right.
Nobody's in charge. And I'll pay you what you want.
As far as building out.
Building a studio. So I started with him on April 15th, and we started, figuring out, the console was still being built and all this. I started building the machine room and getting everything sort of ready, and doing all the wiring and testing all the gear, and just kind of trying to build the studio.
Yeah.
And then not long afterwards, he bought an API console that had been on the show at the AES floor. Mm-hmm. And 5 weeks later, we had built Studio B. And then that was my life for the next, few years.
Yeah.
For the next couple of years. And while that was going on, also engineered, did all the sort of everything but the tracking of this Martina McBride record. Mm-hmm. So I was recording Martina a lot. And we did a lot of work together. A lot of her vocals, all the overdubs, like all the mandolins, all that ancillary stuff that goes on. We did strings, we did all that stuff.
Yeah.
Some of it I did myself. Some of it John did. Some of it with my help as sort of an engineer / assistant, whatever you want to call it. Then we mixed it. It was, a lot of time, and there was a whole bunch of other things. I did a Keb Mo record. I did. Just all this stuff.
In Blackbird?
At Blackbird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have an official capacity or title?
I was the chief engineer.
Yeah.
For a long time, I was sort of the studio manager, traffic manager, chief engineer, bottle washer, know. And there was only like 5 of us there.
Yeah.
And it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Eventually.
And at some point, we had to get other people. But, it went from being a one-room, $3 million facility. That was his goal was $1.5 million.
Yeah.
So it went from that to
always
being
double the money and triple the time.
Yeah, double the money at 10%. It just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we just kept getting more gear, kept getting more stuff, and then in 2005, we bought the space behind it, broke ground to build, or 2004, started building the building that has Studio C and Studio D. It just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I mean, I did a lot of stuff. I did a thing with Willie Nelson, and did a thing with Haggard. I did a bunch of kind of classic country things, and some rock stuff. I did Secret Machines.
Oh,
did a pair of singles for Secret Machines, which was pretty cool. But it's just kind of one of those things. It's like working in a big studio in Nashville. If people need somebody, they'll use you.
Right.
And you're there, and they know you, and they know you do a good job. But I wasn't trying to be an engineer.
Right.
I was just because I didn't have time.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be doing records.
Yeah.
But it was always sort of a deal like, well, once this place sort of sorts itself out, and we stop building, then I can concentrate on that. We just never stopped building.
Yeah. What's the difference with Blackbird that you saw that brought people in?
I think a couple things. I think we did everything in our power to make sure that it was the best, highest quality audio at all times you could possibly have.
Yeah.
So, in effect, we weren't really trying to bring in the artist as much as we're trying to make the engineer so comfortable that he couldn't imagine going anywhere else. You know, when an engineer walks in,
Reel him in.
yeah, it really is. When the engineer / producer walks in, and he turns to you and says, "You know what? I really this thing right here, whatever's going on, it needs this thing."
Yeah.
We would go, "Okay," because that was the mantra.
Yeah.
You know, if someone wanted it, that means someone else will want it.
Absolutely.
So, you know, that was the goal. And it really was a stupid field of dreams. If you build it, they'll come. I mean, the thing is about the studio business is that it's one of two things. You either supply a service, and when I mean a service, I mean all of it. Like the sound of the room, the type of console, the microphones you have, the quality of the assistant engineer, you know, the quality of the front desk, snacks, food, drinks, all those things. You supply that, okay, or you supply a room for a budget. Yeah. You supply a room, a tape machine, whatever it is for a budget. Right. So if you have an artist that has a $40,000 record budget,
right,
and they want to act like rock stars for 4 days, 5 days, and then take the record to their house where they can act like normal guys who have a gig at Starbucks. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. They could come in and they could, you know, they would pay the day rate and they would work in the big studio. And when they left, the audio, the sound of the record would be awesome. Right. As long as they were awesome. But, you know, I mean, you know what I mean? It is a, you know, it's a shit in, shit out. So, but the thing was, you know, strangely enough, I kind of think Blackbird kind of harkens back to the old studio days in a way, because you know, bands that got to record had to be good. They were vetted out. Right. They were vetted out by the financials of recording. You know, if you weren't good enough, for someone to want to spend money on you, you didn't record. Right. Now you don't have to be good. Yeah. You don't even have to know how to play. I mean, you know, you can get GarageBand and make some loops, you know, and have piano parts and bass parts and all of it playing along, and, you know, is it your song? Well, I don't know if it's fucking your song or not. You can sing whatever you want over it and auto-tune the shit out of it and put it out. Yeah. And people can vet it out with their dollars. Right, right. That's, you know, it's kind of a simplified way. But back in the day, people listened and they went, no, you guys aren't ready to record yet. Oh, definitely. And so Blackbird's kind of thing was, there's a lot of bands that may not be ready to record here. Maybe they're ready to record, you know, somewhere else. Yeah. Like my studio now. Yeah. Or something. I mean, that's kind of the deal. They may not be ready to record a Blackbird yet. They may not be Kings of Leon. Right. Exactly. You know what I mean? Yeah. They may be, you know, another band that's on their way to being there. That's kind of the deal. And I think that was John's thing. You know, coming back from, I just came from a studio where, you know, I mean, if you wanted a Coke, you went out front and you bought it. Yeah. Yeah. You know?
That's what mine is. There's no extra services.
Everything at Blackbird is free.
Yeah. Wow.
Everything.
You're not getting billed by the number of beers you take out of the fridge.
Everything is free.
So you're going to pay more for the whole experience?
You can pay more for the whole experience. Yeah. If you want beer, we go get beer. Beer and liquor is the only thing we actually charge to the deal. And food orders, you know. Yeah. But I mean, you know, if you order in, but I say we, I'm not really there, but that's what they do. But Coke, sodas, drinks, orange juice, fruit, you know, all that sort of stuff that would normally be a studio. Right. And it used to be like tons of chocolate and M&Ms and all that. And that got the kibosh. Martina's kids were coming home from the studio like 100 miles an hour because they just ate 4 pounds of M&Ms, you know. So that got the kibosh. But
fruit and granola bars.
That all that went away for carrots and things. But
well, so you were doing, you know, because I started noticing that too. That you were doing a bunch of work with Jack and
which is
Did you
really
find yourself just gradually starting to gravitate toward getting out of Blackbird?
Yeah, I
more
mean, basically what happened was, the White Stripes were doing Icky Thump
with Joe.
With Joe,
Yeah.
Yep, Joe was over there doing Icky Thump, and actually kept running into Jack in the hallway.
Yeah.
And the reason being is that while Icky Thump was being done, George Massenberg and I were doing a bunch of work in his studio, in Studio C. It's not really his, but in Studio C, to get it up and running. So they were working in Studio D. C is just right across the hall from it, and they share a hallway between the two machine rooms.
Right.
So I was always out in the machine room, either wiring or doing something for Studio C, and Jack would come through, and I think at first he was wondering what the heck I was always doing out there. Was I watching the session, or was I lurking? Right. He's like, so, you're out here all the time, I mean, I'll put this in, but like, what are you doing out here? Yeah. Can you do it somewhere else? I was like, well, actually, no, I can't do it anywhere else. But I said, well, I'm sorry. If I'm bothering you, I'll block up that window. There's a window. He goes, oh no, you're not bothering me. I just wondered. I go, well, I'm happy to do it. But unfortunately, this right here, this is where this has to be. I was like, what is all this? It's all digital, shit. And so I kind of told him. He's like, oh, okay, well, do you guys got a spring reverb? Yeah. I'm like, yeah, we do. I mean, like a BX20 or BX10. I go, I think we got a BX10. Yeah. I go, I've got this great Alamo spring reverb. He goes, oh, I love those. Yeah. I go, you want to try it out? I'll go get it for you. And he goes, well, you don't have to go get it. I go, no, it's a big deal. It's right down the street. Yeah.
That one. I saw that guy.
I'll just go get it. It's no big deal. He said, well, okay. So I go and get it, and I bring it to him. Yeah. And they ended up using it quite a bunch on the record.
Good.
And then I loaned him something else. I can't remember what it was. So that I started having this sort of conversation with him. And I was the guy, I gave him and Patrick the first tour of the place. Right. So we had kind of talked a little. Yeah. But really just a little, And then there was a couple times where Joe needed me to come in and do some synchronization trickery. Yeah. Where they had made an edit to the master and now had to put time code on the master, so we had to jam code over a punch in and all that. So that stuff's, that's the trickery that I think Joe was sort of like, you can do that. Yeah. So I'm in there punching in time code on their tape. That was fun. Little jam sync, punch in, punch out. So one day I was over here working, and they forwarded a call from Jack to me, and he said, hey, it's Jack, and wondering if you could do a session with me with Danger Mouse.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, yeah, man, that'd be great. So we talked. And right near the end of that conversation, I said, so, Jack, I got this question. I go, what do I call him? And he goes, what? I go, what do I call him? I go, Danger Mouse. Do I just call him Danger Mouse? He goes, oh, no, his name's Brian,
Yeah.
Brian. I go, cool, that's great. We really hit it off. Yeah. Just I gave him some toys and tools that he could use in the track room because he was just doing vocals. Yeah. I brought a Space Echo and a CB mic, and I brought some things, an amp behind him, and chamber, and all these things that he could sort of try out. Yeah. And I could go real fast and let him sort of find the sound of what he wanted. Right. And so we hit it off pretty well. Then he called me to do the Spanish language version of Conquest. Which was fun, and that actually had an interesting little problem with it. Joe had made an edit on the master after they'd put the slave away. Oh. And so it wouldn't sync up. So now I had to make a new master. So when Jack came, I said, well, there's this little problem. I show you. And I go, it's kind of cool sounding, but basically it's a half second off. Now, if I start it in the middle of the tape or anything after the intro, it's fine. I go, but we couldn't mix it this way. Right. And he goes, well, that's pretty cool sounding. I go, yeah, it's kind of south of the border because the horns went da-da-da, da-da-da. No. They were a half second off. Right. And da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, Right. He goes, well, just remember that. I go, okay, yeah, it's cool. I remember that. Yeah. And so we'll do this. So I made a copy of it, and we did the track. So then when we mixed it, he was like, I think we should just have fun with this. Because I was like, do you want me just to bring up the instrumental? He goes, there's an instrumental? I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
He's like, no, let's just remix it. Let's have fun with it.
Yeah.
So we spent an hour and a half, remixed it.
Yeah.
Him and I. And then we sent it off. And, 2 or 3 weeks goes by. And I remember this real distinctly. Yeah. It was the 20th, like the 21st, 22nd, somewhere right before Christmas. And I was walking out of Studio C. I had been doing something with George. I don't remember what it was. And Jack called my phone. And I was like, hey, man. He goes, hey, I got the mastering back from Conquest, man. It's really, really great. He goes, are you busy in February? I go, not right now. He goes, I'd like you to mix the Raconteurs record. And I went, yeah, I'm definitely not busy.
Yeah.
I can do that.
Yeah.
And I remember, he goes, well, great, man. He goes, we're going to be in there recording most of January, but we should start about the 1st of February. Okay, that'd be great. And, I hung up, and I remember just sitting there for a second and thinking, did that just really happen?
Yeah.
You
go from being the guy like, why are you in the machine room?
Why am I in the machine room to you're mixing our record? And so I showed up. Joe was there working.
Yeah.
I don't know I do know some of what was going on, but I think the thing was they'd already made a decision. They wanted somebody else mix it.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason.
Yeah. I know. There's a lot of times that we don't get the whole story.
Yeah.
At different stages of making records.
I kind of know some of it, but
yeah.
To be honest with you, I think it was because they decided to use somebody else, and that guy didn't want Jack there to mix it, like a mixer guy.
They didn't want Jack around.
Yeah, and there's absolutely no way.
There's
absolutely no way.
I don't think that'd work.
Yeah, he's the other mixer. I mean, he's right up in there with me. I mixed Consolers of the Lonely in 7 days.
Perfect.
15 songs, 7 days.
Yeah.
Then we did about 5 days of recalls, fixes, and mastering mock-up. We had a day where we played it for their label.
Yeah.
I mean, just kind of that stuff. The whole thing took about 14 days to get it done. But basically, I mixed the whole record in 7.
That's good.
And I kept thinking to myself, I'm just doing roughs. They're going to send this to somebody else. They're going to send this to somebody else. But the thing is that Jack would go out and he would get in his car and he liked it.
Right.
So, when I listen to it now, do I think it's this perfect thing? I really just knocked the ball out of the park.
Yeah.
You know what? I didn't do it the way Joe would have done it.
Yeah.
But 2 years later, or whatever, I hear the mistakes, but no one else does.
Right.
I mean, obviously somebody liked it. So so that was the deal. And then from there it just we went from the Raconteurs record into we did the Bond theme, and then we did the White Stripes movie. Mm-hmm. And then right about that time is when Third Man had just starting to get built.
Yeah. Well,
actually, Third Man was already built. We started doing the White Stripes movie, but it went from and then we just started doing Karen's record.
Right.
And then the Dead Weather record just sort of
fell into place.
Came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Just fucking came out of nowhere. But
so you helped them pick stuff out for the studio.
I helped. I came
studio.
in. Like the console had already. Joe Chigarelli found in the console.
Yeah. And
he had found the first tape machine.
Right.
First Studer.
Yeah.
I came in right at, and he'd bought the Fairchild, which he bought from McBride. He bought from Blackbird. Yeah. And we put it in a big box. It said Jack's first Fairchild on it, on the side, with a bow.
His firstborn.
Yeah, pretty funny. But I was there. I mean, I literally unpacked the Raconteurs recording thing from Brendan's house.
Right.
That Jack that they bought for rehearsal. A bunch of Hosa cables, mic cables and shit, and fucked up mic stands. And the tape machine was there. My friend Mike Rhodes, who has a business here in town called Skinny Fish Studio Services. He's a wiring guy.
Yeah.
It's not Michael Rhodes, the bass player, but Michael Rhodes, the wiring guy. He had wired it, and he had smartly talked Jack into you want more than 8 mic lines.
Oh yeah.
You know, because he really wanted it really small, and so he had smartly talked him into like building a little bigger.
Yeah, that's
which was
good.
good. And I went over there the day the console came in and was turned on, and we hooked it up to the Studer, and about 4 days later, we did that session with Keith Richards.
And that's just still kind of.
It's nothing.
Yeah.
It's nothing. It sort of never happened. But
yeah.
It was just they just came and
Hang
played
out,
and hung
fun.
out. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually reported, strangely enough, in the news here.
Yeah,
because the car driver called the guy who drove him to the house, called the newspaper, because none of us. I mean, it was super secret.
That's bizarre.
Yeah, but like it was in the news the next day. We were like, fuck.
Yeah, what can you do?
Yeah, so. But yeah, it was just nothing. They were just sort of, to be honest with you, they just jammed.
Yeah.
They jammed, they hung out.
Oh, totally.
You know, it's pretty cool. We were sitting around the fire pit, and Jack had his guitar, which was tuned in open G, and I picked it up and kind of plucked a couple notes, and then realized I was playing the beginning of Honky Tonk Woman. And Keith Richards is sitting right next to me. Yeah. And I just went, I looked at Jack and went, bam, bam, bam. I went, fuck this. I just put it down like I go, like he's looking at me, and Keith over here smoking, and I go, Jack's like,
whoops, it's in the air.
Yeah.
It's really neat. I mean, it's just like an organic kind of you getting involved with this. It just seemed to kind of just kept flowing along, like based on interactions and
I mean,
shared taste.
I think we kind of get along. We get along pretty well together. You know, he's a funny guy, and we you know. I mean, you know, I can't speak for him, but I mean, I really like him. He's great. Yeah. He's been great to work with, and you know, I mean,
you've gotten a lot of other gigs now based on your work that people have seen.
A little
with this stuff. Yeah,
I'll tell you what's funny. I didn't get any work whatsoever because I won a Grammy.
Yeah, I don't know.
I got more work because people like the Dead Weather record.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think what happens is, and especially in a music town like Nashville, is you're sort of no one until you're suddenly somebody.
Oh,
and I'm not a hipster. I mean, I'm 46 years old.
Yeah.
I don't go and hang out at clubs downtown and watch bands or know anything about bands or attest to that scene. I don't.
Yeah.
I'm not. That's just not me.
Yeah.
What ends up happening is somebody will say, "Hey, I heard this record. I really like it. You know, who the fuck did it?"
Right.
They'll find my name. They'll Google me online. They get my incredible interactive website.
Multimedia content.
All my multimedia content. And then somebody will call me.
Yeah.
You know, and the thing is, I always have my phone. I always answer emails.
Yeah.
You know, I just, if somebody calls me about a gig, I will call them back.
Yeah.
I think that what happens is I think you get to a certain point in this business and people just suddenly think that you are, you know, an LA cat, or you're unapproachable about their low budget gig.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like the reality is that I can make a pretty good living doing 3 or 4 low budget records a month.
Right.
I'm not trying to drive a Maserati.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not booking Ocean Way for 5 years.
Right.
I have this room.
Yeah.
And I have the gear that I have that's spread out in this building.
Right.
And I have all this, and this is all paid for. I am not complicated. You know, I don't like building 9 million fucking tracks or mixing 9 million tracks. I'll just turn shit off.
Yeah.
I mean, if I get a record that has a drum, has drums, and has 8 tracks of loops, I am fucking turning half of that shit off.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I mean, unless it's absolutely critical to the song, what the fuck is all that doing in there?
Yeah.
You know, or why does the band need 25 tracks of guitars? Well, they don't.
Yeah.
You know, all
Most
they're doing
likely
is making it really small.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know, the thing is for me is like, I like it when there's, you know, 2 or 3 instruments.
Mm-hmm.
you know, and then suddenly you got all this space that you can fill. I mean, you can make guitars really fucking loud, and drums really fucking loud, and the bass really fucking loud, and all of it really loud and in your face, because there's not 55 tracks of other bullshit.
When you work with someone like Jack who's producing something, you know, there's a definite push to make it have something. Give it some grit, give it some sonic.
It's got to be interesting.
Yeah. And it seems like, I mean, the thing that I feel sometimes is people are there's a process that people will let be in place that can certainly suck the interesting out of it.
But Jack, he'll come in and he'll say, "Man, that sounds great." Or, I mean, I really wish we could get it. I really wish the piano would cut more.
Yeah.
I really wish the piano didn't cut more.
Right.
That's usually what it comes down to, because I'm always like trying to make it sound like, you know, Jerry Lee Lewis and
get a little edge in
you know, I'm more of trying to make it sound like, you know, Great Balls of Fire but I mean, it doesn't always work for everything.
Yeah,
you know.
totally.
But I mean, that's like I think everybody has your first inclination. Like, okay, we're doing a rock record with this piano. It's going to be Jerry Lee Lewis. You know, that's my first thing. You know,
that's fine.
You know, okay, here's a two guitar, bass and drums band. What do the drums sound like? Well, I think they're going to either be Ringo or something, you know, or you know what I mean, or Charlie Watts. Okay, so this band is drums, bass, guitar, and the drummer has a huge drum set, Keith. So, you know, I mean, that's like with Jack. It's like I just sort of like, okay, how would this get recorded? You know, I mean, how do I capture that vibe in this space? I mean, you saw the space; it's not big.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's no room to it.
Yeah.
And everybody's recording in one room.
Right.
So I mean, there's there's guitars on drums, and there's the bass is on the drums, and the drums are on the bass, and the drums are on the guitar a little bit because there is the back of the mic, and if it's a dead weather, she's out in the middle of the room singing through a 77, and that, you know, and this crazy Ampex mic through an amp. Yeah. So I mean, all those things are sounds that create the vibe of it.
The Wanda Jackson stuff you played me sounds great, but my first impression was like, somebody at a record label, well, a standard record label, wouldn't like it, like a major label, you know. Somebody, if someone said like, "Oh, good, we got a new record from her," they'd go, "Yuck, what's this?" Which to me, I heard it and I go, I can't believe she made a record this cool at this stage in the game.
Yeah, she's 72, you know.
Right, you know, it's awesome. That sounds like it sounds like a record I would buy, you know, from way back. You know, like, hey, I found a 7-inch. Yeah, you know.
I think that's
awesome.
I think like, I think we're not trying to reinvent the wheel with her. Right. You know.
It's so fun,
I say we. I don't think Jack or anybody is trying to. Yeah. I don't think anyone is trying to reinvent the wheel. Right. You know, we had a band together, and we had horns and steel, and 2 bass players, and electric guitar, and piano, and acoustic guitar, and drums. You know, drums, 2 bass players. Yeah. You know, 2 bass players, a guitar player, a steel guitar player, acoustic guitar player, a horn section, and a keyboardist. Yeah. And you know, we've got to get that into 7 tracks. Yeah. You know, and
pretty amazing.
Some of Wanda's stuff we split out. We did a slave reel and did, you know, we did another 8-track locked up to do some vocal passes, to do some vocal takes. Oh, cool. And then basically just kind of comped them together, you know, punched them together. Yeah. But and then did some background vocals, and that stuff ended up being, you know, I can't say that any of that record is 16-track. Right. It is 16-track, but it's all really about 10 tracks. Yeah. Right. I'll say that definitely there was a full band playing live. In the room. Yeah. And if there was, if we did 2 takes of it, you know, if the chorus from the second take was the take, we cut the chorus into the master. Yeah, yeah. You know, we don't. I'm not afraid to cut tape. Yeah, yeah. Even though it is a little frightening at 7.5. The great thing about working with Jack is that he's pretty fearless. Yeah. Like, and amazingly tolerant of mistakes. Because he doesn't have. He really shouldn't have to be. I mean, at the level that we're at, and at the length of time I've been doing this, you know, he shouldn't have to be tolerant of mistakes. You know, he should be able. He should feel like he could get pissed that I fucked something up. Yeah, but he never does. I mean, if there's ever a fucked up punch in or something, he's just like, yeah, man, no problem. We'll just do it again. It'll be better anyway.
Yeah.
And you know, there's a fucked up punch in I did on the Dead Weather record, and he allows those things. He allows musicians to, you know, make mistakes that end up being cool.
Yeah.
You know, so I can't talk about his production style that much because it's his, but I can tell you that making records with him is very enjoyable.
Thanks for listening. Find us online at tapeop.com, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Until next time.